So if you're sort of impersonating a CEO, or another individual within an organization, what can deepfakes do to persuade, influence, and potentially gain access?
Welcome to Needle Stack, the podcast for professional online research. I'm Jeff Phillips, your host.
And I'm Shannon Reagan, producer and co-host. And today we're discussing tech and world events that are shaking up Ocean researchers' lives.
Yeah, and joining us for that discussion is Neil Spencer. He's Director of Market Strategy and Partnerships at LifeRaft. Neil, welcome to the show.
Hi, folks. Lovely to be here, and thank you very much indeed for having me.
Now, super excited that you're joining us. Now, for our listeners of the show, they may be familiar with the LifeRaft name. A few weeks ago, we rebroadcast an episode from the LifeRaft podcast. Talking Threat Intelligence is the name. They were kind enough to have one of our product managers, actually our Director of Product Management, Daniel Ben-Shitrit, on from our organization to talk about the impacts that ChatGPT is having in the security space. Kind of piggybacking on that, maybe let's look at it from another perspective, a little broader. Neil, how are you seeing AI impacting the OSINT space overall?
Yeah, great questions. AI and OSINT isn't a new concept. AI has been used with OSINT for years now. So I've been with LifeRaft sort of for 6 years, and even at our formative stage, we had a level of AI in the platform. It's really how the technology has evolved over the years. So that I think is key, and quite frankly, how it has become so commercially available. These large language models that used to be very bespoke, very specifically sort of intrinsically in-house built language models, now almost anybody can use. So it's really taken what is something that was very, very specialized and essentially the purview of either very large organizations or the likes of the defense and intelligence sectors, and turn that into a tool that anybody can use. And that's the beauty of its translation into OSINT. The beauty of OSINT is anybody can get it. That's the nature of OSINT. But really, it's taking that. And it's a 10x multiplier, if not 100x multiplier for the information that can be collected. And I can talk to some of that a bit further. But yeah, it is not a new concept, I suppose. Mm-hmm. It is a concept that has evolved, grown, and now is becoming ubiquitous because of the way that the technology has shifted and the likes of ChatGPT, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's been such hot focus on ChatGPT for the last several months, but generative AI has been around for a long time now. Are you seeing, or what is your perspective on maybe some of the more image generation or almost deepfake style tools, Midjourney or some of the video tools, and how that's impacting those in?
Yeah, certainly. And you look at, the likes of Midjourney, you look at just how quickly people can create images, if you type a few prompts. Deepfakes are obviously something that is on the horizon. Not even the horizon, it is really becoming a real threat these days, sort of be it to create social engineering attacks from a fraud perspective. So if you're sort of impersonating a CEO, or another individual within an organization, what can deepfakes do to persuade, influence, and potentially gain access to systems, or influence individuals to open up access that otherwise they wouldn't have if you didn't have somebody's face sitting there. And then you look at the likes of images and with the lens of brand protection, et cetera, creating fake images with generative AI techniques, opens up a new realm of, maybe you start to put brands in negative situations that otherwise wouldn't have existed. It's something that is certainly a challenge. Again, if you go back sort of in those timeframes 2 years ago, and you look at sort of deep fakes and sort of things coming on the horizon there, and now fast forward is a very prominent challenge that's facing security practitioners.
Yeah, didn't take long.
No, indeed.
No. But one thing on the good side, I think you mentioned there's so much information, but then as compared to the offensive side of AI from a cyber criminal perspective, the side of using it for good in terms of summarizing and reporting and sifting through all of that data, right? So it's got some of that benefit for the Ocean analysts.
Yeah, huge. And I think sort of it would go back to that thought process of, now it is, AI for the people, if you will, and AI for organizations like ours. Again, we've had AI in our platform, but the likes of OpenAI, these large language models, which are so now freely available, it is, again, I'll use that term, sort of 100x multiplier as far as taking the ability to summarize and understand quickly and easily a vast amount of content and turning that into arguably tangible takeaways. Now, it's not a silver bullet. And I think people have to remember that when people say, oh, AI, it solves, all of these problems. We are always conscious to preach in the LifeRaft house that AI is no substitute for an analyst. A good analyst will always provide the so what and the depth of context that AI just doesn't have. So AI is phenomenal at, as you say, sort of taking vast amounts of information, potentially connecting dots that otherwise an analyst may not have been able to see or may have just taken them longer to see. But AI is, as I say, great for elevating that. But it's really the human analyst layer, or a human in general, a subject matter expert that can look at the content that AI has serviced and then add some so what to it, add some context, and to a certain extent, and AI can help with this as well. But the what's next. So when we look at our customer base and so corporate security teams, it's detect a threat. Here's what type of threat it is. Here's why it matters to you. It's for the human analyst to understand realistically, based on these parameters that I'm seeing, where do I go next and where do I go next in the playbook?
Yeah. I thought it was interesting when, we were talking about the speed of evolution of these types of tools. And recently I've been thinking about, the history of OSINT has always been adaptive, adapting to like changing landscapes, just the advent of the internet and search engines. Like, there's this issue of trust and verification, like at every turn, this seems to be the next hill to climb and keeping up with this ever evolving landscape. I was thinking of other things that are forcing adaptation or changes in practices, is the upheaval in the social media space. Platforms are changing, access to platforms are changing. What impacts are you seeing in changes within the social media sphere on OSINT?
Yeah, absolutely. And a bit like AI, although in this instance, it's potentially for the negative, depending which way you look at it. There are threats and opportunities on both sides. But it is, again, the sort of landscape has started to shift, over the years. But if you go back 5-6 years ago, there were the constants. There were the Facebooks, now Metas of the world. Even beyond that. So, and you've got the Twitters of the world. Then you move into the Instagrams of the world, slightly newer, platforms on the block. Fast forward, and especially kind of when you come into the world of, let's cast our minds back to the 2020 elections, the fragmentation of the OSINT space became prominent, even though a lot of these platforms like Mastodon, etc., were there and about sort of, prior to that time. Suddenly there was this massive shift and new platforms coming seemingly online overnight. So the Parlers of the world, Parler suddenly became the number one downloaded app in the App Store and indeed in the Google Play Store. Gab, again, go back, that existed for 2012. The sort of Pittsburgh single choosing manifesto was posted there. So again, fast forward, it's not a new player on the horizon, but it starts to be brought to prominence due to those shifts in the political stage and so on and so forth. So that's kind of some history. You fast forward and it continues to shift. So the most recent example of that, well, Twitter's change in management, etc. People start to want to explore other platforms. Again, we saw the rise in the likes of Mastodon there. People shifting to places like Gab. Parler now doesn't exist. The number one app no longer exists. So yeah. As OSINT practitioners, part of the struggle is understanding where the threat landscape is going to move to, and how to monitor that and how to keep on top of that. And then fast forward again, so okay, Meta, Zuckerberg and co. quite rightly see an opportunity. No slouches. Okay, what can we do for an alternative to Twitter? Well, let's create threads. And Threads went from 10 million registered users in the first week to I think sort of 40 million plus in its maybe more than that, 44 million at its peak. Today there was an article that came out that they've lost 82% of that. So
82.
Even with those large prominent players in the market, people will shift and people sort of go to and from Twitter and to and from Threads, and it whilst some of these main some of these main platforms in the market will persist. Threads, if you fast forward 2 years' time, does Meta and co decide to actually that's not a good platform to use? So does that disappear like Parler did? To summarize, the landscape is eternally shifting, and as those practitioners, it is tricky to understand what content is where, and especially where you look at decentralized platforms like Mastodon. Come back to Mastodon, but also the value there. Like I haven't touched on Reddit. Reddit is, anybody who follows Reddit is going through its own shift at the moment. They're trying to commercialize it, and obviously some of the APIs that were made available they've changed the format in which those are available, et cetera, et cetera. So there are challenges throughout, and that poses challenges for threat detection, where it's going to look at it, but then also for sort of from the investigative piece, just okay, if there is a threat that's detected, how do you best understand what that threat is and where they are, or potentially where that threat is emerging from those platforms?
I was just going to say, maybe not the nature of change is anything new, but certainly the speed of it now feels a bit dizzying. So
absolutely,
good luck out there.
Well, I was going to bring that up, kind of expanding on that when we say threat detection, right? So that threat could be a lot of things. Like if I'm someone on the government side and looking at nation state type things, I may live and breathe these social media platforms and keeping up with all those changes, versus if I'm a cybersecurity, or you mentioned like a brand fraud type person, there's keeping up with all these fringe social networks. Are they valuable to me? As well as other things change, like X change where you can't log in without a profile. So that gets really difficult too. What's valuable to me if that's not my core job? I need to use it, let's say in the cybersecurity world, but I'm not living and breathing necessarily looking for cyber threats there. Maybe I should be. And how do I know which ones and when? Maybe I look at tools to do that for me, or type of a scenario, right? I can know the big ones, but all these fringe ones, are they valuable? That seems to me really difficult for the cybersecurity analysts.
Absolutely, and without hammering on the LifeRaft drum too hard, that is essentially why we exist as a platform. Our goal, our mission is zero missed threats. So it is really our day-to-day job to make sure that we have a good understanding of what these landscapes are, where they're shifting, how potentially we can collect data from them. Are there publicly available APIs? Do we have to look at other options? And then surface that up in a platform that the users can understand. I am always conscious to point out, again, to come back sort of full circle, OSINT. If you're an OSINT researcher, if you're a really good OSINT researcher, you know how to access a lot of these platforms. Can you do it at scale? That's where the challenge comes in. And if you're not, essentially, we spoke to corporate security sector. corporations will vary in their level of OSINT analysts and analysts at large that they have on their team, on their security team. Does everybody going to have a minute understanding of every single social media platform? Or indeed, let's broaden that outside of social media. Let's go to deep web platforms. Let's go to dark web platforms. Mm-hmm. How do you make sense of that vast landscape? How do you collect data? And I think to your point, Jeff, how do you make sure that when you do, if we go for the name of the podcast, when there is that needle in the haystack out there, how do you find that needle in the haystack? And I think, where you folks at Authenticate come in, how do you then potentially, our platform is so often, it is a detection and validation tool, very important part of the workflow. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you need to jump out of our platform and into the native platform to really dig into something. And that's why we have a partnership with you guys, where it gives you that next step of, okay, we can still do this in a safe environment if we need to step out of Navigator in our instance and go and explore in the native platform, mm-hmm. the threat, what it means, a little bit more about the context and things like the silo browser. Right. That's where that really comes to the fore.
Yeah. I think, the nature of, the AI discussion, generative AI in OSINT is just so much on time saving of like, if I am going to sit down and actually do my human backed research, like where do I begin? Like, how do I maximize, my efforts to the best of my abilities, and what tools do I use to do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was thinking too, with AI and social media and bad actors, that, it just seems like such a ripe time for misinformation, which I feel like maybe we've just been saying that endlessly, like for the last 6 years. Yeah. But, it feels like now it might be really bad. And there's a land war in Asia or in Europe, I guess.
Detail. Yeah.
Yeah. So this perfect storm, I guess, how is let's just focus on the war itself. Like, how is this disrupting OSINT? Or, I feel like it's being felt in all corners of the world. It's certainly being felt in the OSINT sphere as well.
And I think, and I wish I could attribute an individual to this quote, but I've heard the phrase where, the Ukraine-Russia conflict is the conflict of OSINT. Like, it's the dawn of OSINT as far as, sure, if you go back to recent conflicts, etc., you had, if we look at Iraq, Syria, Islamic mm-hmm. State, so on and so forth, Telegram was their platform of choice for posting our content, but it was their content. So mm-hmm. they were controlling the narrative. Really information from the ground was still relatively limited. You fast forward and, you look at Ukraine, Russia, all of a sudden Telegram being a relatively niche platform, and you two both know it well for being a treasure trove of cyber criminality and so on and so forth from there. Now something like Telegram is the platform of choice for government communications, for getting some ground truth on, sometimes ground truth, but depending on who's posting. But it is truth. It is, and this is where it comes back to sort of good OSINT acumen of, okay, we know that there is a good, valuable source of information here, and in this instance, it's Telegram. But we have to understand that there are both good actors and bad actors out there. Mm-hmm. There are those that are journalists that are going to be truly giving you on the ground information, from bomb strikes to troop movements, especially in those early days. There was some incredibly valuable information in Telegram in comparison to the likes of Twitter. Twitter was still quite newsy in the sort of opening days of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and then sort of fast forward. So Twitter was quite newsy. Telegram was giving you that very, very good granular insights to what was going on the ground. And then again, you fast forward and just the sheer volume of content. And if I come back to my earlier statement that it is the conflict of OSINT, it is the dawn of OSINT. Anybody can go on, again, Reddit, Twitter, to a lesser extent things like Facebook, but it's all there for people to see if you want to spend enough time and effort going into those places. You can learn huge amounts, and and I think that again is indicative of just the sheer amount of data that's out there. The Ukraine-Russia conflict sort of is a magnifying glass for that particular conflict.
What I was going to say was expanding out a little bit again to more like geopolitical. So again, we have lots of listeners that are into the nation state side, but if I go back into cybersecurity, these geopolitical events are impacting me even if I'm in a SOC now. Due to the types of warfare that are going on, right? So it's something more. Now I have to pay attention to geopolitical events as a SOC analyst, in addition to the shifting, landscape of social media platforms. What happened to just let me monitor my firewall logs, right? So there's just what tons and tons. Like I have to care about geopolitical events because of what they might be doing with malware and whatnot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, and I think two points on that, Jeff. So one is in the corporate space, we're absolutely starting to see sort of this fusion of physical and cyber because the two are hard to separate. So I can think of a few of our customers that have those fusion centers. Historically there was firewall between the two but now they can't. Let's say there are a number of our users that have evolved to have these fusion centers with the two expertise combined because let's look at some examples. So Ukraine, Russia, so two adversarial states. Viasat. The Viasat hack was probably a prime example of that. So Viasat, US-based entity, strong footprint commercially in the Ukraine, supply a lot of satcom platforms, but not only were they used on a civilian scale, but also at a military scale. So the Russians, understandably, took it upon themselves to hack that system. That then had an impact on the broader Viasat business, but it was an output of the Ukraine-Russia conflict and the tactics that those two adversarial states were using in that instance, Russia against Ukraine. But it was a tactical choice that they made that then had a knock-on effect on the broader Viasat system, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the collateral damage in global conflict. When you were saying about just the volume of OSINT and open source information coming out of the war and largely posted to social media channels that anybody can get in, I think they brought this up on the Talking Threat Intelligence podcast about the lens through which the Wagner mutiny was seen by many people, I think, who are starting to have AI in the back of their head at all times. It's like, is this real? This seems crazy, one. And then is this real? That there is just so much more doubt sewn into things. But doubt and verification are very good for, the OSINT field. Do you see as a strange silver lining of this, an amplification of the OSINT field or more people getting involved in that type of work?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's, and when we look at the prominence of it, it piques the interest. I think yes, to answer your question, and for a couple of reasons. Like say, now people, it is at their fingertips. They can go and explore it a bit more easily. You've still got the stalwarts, and I always try and call out the likes of Bellingcat on these sorts of things because they are foundational, I believe, in sort of public awareness of OSINT, and obviously just the work they do is phenomenal. And then, so yes, you've got now, especially with the likes of generative AI, you've got some tools around you that you can start to essentially make understanding and easier access to some of the data sources and start to, sort of really summarize. But if we look at what's going on Twitter, the sort of constraints that Twitter started to put on some of their feeds, what's going on TweetDeck. TweetDeck now is no longer a free tool, and that used to be sort of the go-to option for again OSINT researchers, especially if you're looking at more of a situational awareness type use case. Build TweetDeck, build your feeds. That's starting to be clamped down upon. So whilst I think these geopolitical insights and some of the trends that we're seeing will make people far more interested in OSINT, I think there are still a lot more barriers to potentially access that information than arguably ever there was. As much as we've sat here and sort of said, hey, AI is going to make this a lot easier for everybody, getting access to some of that information in the first instance actually is going to continue to be very difficult.
Yeah, other doors are closing for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, as we begin to wrap up, Neil, what are some parting thoughts that you might have for our audience on how they face and keep up with and deal with that evolving landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, and so we touched on it briefly, if we come back into good OSINT best practices. So, how do you detect and then fundamentally validate? So if you're looking at, we touched on sort of misinformation campaigns, disinformation campaigns. So, it is, if you are seeing a threat, if you're looking at a piece of intelligence, how do you start to validate that piece? So how do you start to go to potentially secondary sources to make sure, okay, this is a message that we're starting to see, if it's an image, if it's a post, and I'm concerned about it. What do you do then to back it up? What is that second layer of validation? Do you then, to our discussion earlier, go back out into the platform and sort of go from there? Do you start to look for secondary sources that might be corroborating what that initial statement is or that initial threat? What other secondary research can you do to go and validate? So I think, if we're looking at some of the summaries that we've been talking about, the landscape is shifting phenomenally. It's shifting fast. Mm-hmm. AI is there to help, but it is not a silver bullet. But ultimately, OSINT best practices will help you overcome a lot of things. Do the research, make sure that you have the right headspace, and use the tools to the best of, to really amplify your efforts. The tools are there to make your life easier, and yeah, that's what they're there for.
That makes a lot of sense. Especially as we try to talk about on the show, leaning on your OSINT best practices is more important than ever, and leveraging all the tools out there. Neil, thanks for joining us today. This is a super interesting conversation. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our audience, if you liked what you heard, you can view transcripts and other episode info on our website, authenticate.com/needlestack. That's authentic with the number 8.com/needlestack. And be sure to let us know your thoughts on Twitter @needlestackpod, and to like and subscribe wherever you're listening today. We'll see you next time with more on the latest in OSINT. Stay tuned.
Bye.